Thanks so much. Bonjour. I want to start off with just some comments around Omicron. Canadians are getting really, really worried about this as they're seeing more and more information about the mutations, about questions around how vaccines will work or not work with Omicron and that variant. So there's a lot of worry out there. And what we need to do, there's two things that I'm, again, pushing for. We're seeing some positive signs on this, but we want to see a clear process around testing for people coming into Canada and a proper process around quarantining. Those are two serious concerns around how we can slow down the spread. But it really highlights that those might buy us some time. The spread is inevitable. And the only way we can fight it truly is to make sure we vaccinate the world. And the most important tool in doing that is to waive the patent protection. Justin Trudeau needs to stop protecting the profits of pharmaceuticals and start standing up for countries with less resources and say that they should have the ability to produce the vaccines locally. That is the most important tool in fighting this pandemic. It is a global pandemic, which means we need to fight it globally. And to do our part means supporting countries that want to produce this vaccine locally and be able to produce it domestically. To do that, we need to waive the patent protection. Donc, je veux toucher deux enjeux aujourd'hui sur Omicron. Premièrement, les gens ont peur. Il y a beaucoup de questions qui étaient soulevées à cause du fait qu'il y a beaucoup de mutations. On ne sait pas si les vaccins vont être efficaces ou non avec cette variante. Donc, il y a plusieurs questions et ça lève deux choses. Premièrement, on doit faire tout ce qu'on peut pour ralentir le partage de cette variante. Donc, ce qui est tellement important, c'est d'avoir des testings pour les gens qui arrivent et un bon système de quarantaine. Deuxièmement, ce qui était soulevé par cette variante, c'est le fait qu'on doit faire notre part dans la lutte mondiale contre la pandémie. Et ça veut dire qu'on doit aider les autres pays d'avoir la capacité de produire le vaccin chez eux. Et ce moment, Justin Trudeau continue de défendre les profits des grandes entreprises pharmaceutiques au lieu de défendre les intérêts des pays moins nantis ou les pays avec moins de ressources qui doivent avoir la capacité de produire les vaccins chez eux. On doit faire face à cette pandémie globale avec une approche globale. Merci. Avec ça, I'm ready for any questions you might have. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Alex Ballingal, Toronto Star. Just on another matter, do you think Canada should boycott the Beijing Olympics?
I think there's been some serious concerns raised around the security of folks, given some of the recent news out of not recent in terms of just this week, but for the past period of years, are concerns around human rights violations, concerns around suppression of freedom of speech, and those concerns definitely raise questions about the safety and security of our athletes. And I think some of those questions are legitimate questions. So I want to see our athletes safe and not in any risk. And that's my primary concern.
So I guess on the question of a boycott, and there's Canada could not send any athletes or Canada could not send any government representatives. Are either of those two options for you good ideas? Would you support either of those?
My focus is on the safety and security of our athletes, and given concerns raised around people who are outspoken human rights critics and the track record of China when it comes to those human rights critics, I'm concerned about the safety and security, and those concerns have been raised. And I think that's where my focus is. I want to see that addressed.
Bonjour, M. Singh, Catherine Lévesque, la presse canadienne.
Bonjour.
Je voulais revenir sur Omicron et avoir votre réaction aussi à la nouvelle d'hier, l'annonce d'hier, qui est qu'on rajoute 3 pays du continent africain à cette fameuse liste des mesures donc plus resserrées. Qu'est-ce que vous en pensez? Et est-ce que vous pensez que c'est juste, considérant qu'il y a aussi des cas en Europe, mais aussi à Hong Kong et en Israël?
Je dirais que il y a des autres pays, comme vous avez mentionné, où la variante est présente. Donc, on doit prendre une approche qui est claire et cohérente. Et donc, les gens ont soulevé des questions sur la cohérence d'interdire des vols de quelques pays, mais pas les autres pays où Omicron est présent. Donc, c'est une bonne question. Ça soulève une question de cohérence. Mais au-delà de ça, ce qui est tellement clair, c'est insuffisant d'avoir seulement une approche d'interdire des vols. On doit aussi avoir une approche de testing, d'examination et de quarantaine. Ça, c'est vraiment important.
Être clair sur votre position parce que hier, vous disiez que ça ne servait à rien finalement de restreindre les vols et de fermer les frontières à certains pays. Donc, je veux juste être clair là-dessus. Est-ce que vous pensez qu'il faut en faire plus? Est-ce qu'il faut le resserrer les frontières à d'autres pays ou, selon vous, c'est inutile là, ce qu'on fait en ce moment?
On doit avoir une approche cohérente. Donc, ça veut dire si on a on interdit quelques pays, mais pas des autres pays qui ont le variant présent, ce n'est pas une approche cohérente. Donc, on doit avoir une approche cohérente, mais les interdictions des vols nous donnent peut-être un peu plus de temps, mais seul, ce n'est pas une approche suffisante. Ce qu'on doit faire, c'est d'avoir une meilleure approche sur testing, sur la quarantaine. Ça, c'est vraiment important. Et au-delà de tout ça, le plus important en approche, c'est de vraiment faire la bataille mondialement pour faire face à la crise de la pandémie. Ça, c'est vraiment clair.
Oui, Hélène Buzetti, je veux juste revenir à la question de mon collègue du Star tout à l'heure. C'est pas clair dans ma tête. On envoie des représentants diplomatiques, le premier ministre, le gouverneur général, des ministres. Est-ce qu'on envoie aux Jeux olympiques ou on n'envoie pas?
Donc, comme j'ai dit par avance, je pense qu'une question de sécurité de nos athlètes était soulevée à cause du bilan de la droit de la personne en Chine et c'est une question qui a du sens. Et mon préoccupation, c'est la sécurité de nos athlètes.
Mais vous ne répondez pas à la question, M. Singh. Je comprends que vous avez une préoccupation, mais vous feriez quoi? Il y a à peine un mois, vous prétendiez que vous étiez prêt à devenir premier ministre. Si vous étiez premier ministre, est-ce que vous iriez? Est-ce que vous enverriez la gouverneure générale ou un de vos ministres représenter le Canada aux Jeux olympiques de Chine?
Je vérifie que nos athlètes sont sécuritaires.
Bonjour, Boris Proulx du Devoir. Les athlètes qui soient sécuritaires, fort bien, mais il y a quelque temps, je pense que vous nous disiez il ne faut pas pénaliser les athlètes pour la diplomatie canadienne. Est-ce que vous pensez encore ça? J'ai compris que les députés néo-démocrates dans la Chambre ne se sont pas opposés à la motion du Bloc québécois qui demandait de reporter les Jeux olympiques. Vous en pensez quoi? Est-ce qu'on doit les reporter, les Jeux olympiques, ou on doit les maintenir tels quels?
Comme on a voté, on est ouvert à l'association, mais ma priorité, c'est la sécurité de nos athlètes et ça, c'est primordial pour moi.
Pardon, en suivi, si la Chine était capable d'assurer la sécurité de nos athlètes, vous, il n'y a pas de problème à y aller malgré la situation des Ouïghours?
Je pense qu'on doit faire tout ce qu'on peut pour mettre la pression sur la Chine, pour arrêter l'opprimation des communautés comme l'Ouïghour, aussi pour défendre la démocratie en Hong Kong. Donc, ce sont des enjeux importants et on va continuer de promouvoir l'idée d'avoir plus de pression sur la Chine pour respecter les droits de la personne.
Yeah, I'd like to ask the same question my colleague asked in French, which is, why is it that no European countries with the Omicron variant have been put on the banned list? And do you think that's discriminatory?
I think it lacks consistency when there are clearly other countries where the Omicron variant is present and those countries aren't included in a list of bans. I think that the approach of banning flights will only help in giving us more time, and it's not sufficient on its own. So the more complete approach would be to really emphasize testing and quarantining in a clear and appropriate, transparent way. That's really important. And then finally, the most important thing for us to do, and what the Omicron variant has shown really clearly, we need to fight this pandemic globally. It's a global pandemic, which means we need to put our resources towards ensuring countries have the capacity to produce the vaccine locally. And that means that Canada cannot defend the profits of pharmaceutical companies. It has to defend the rights of countries to produce the vaccine.
The government announced that from certain countries, pre-flight tests will not be valid and they have to go to a third country. These are all developing world countries, and I wondered if you, again, thought that this was a discriminatory practice.
I think, again, it's a lack of consistency. We need to see a consistent approach for border security and border control. We need to be clear, and we need to be consistent, and we need to make sure that our practices work and are following the public health guidelines. So that is a broad critique of the approach of the Liberal government. We need to make sure that we are being very clear and consistent with our approach. And then we also need to supplement that with testing on arrival. That's the key factor, given that there could be transmission in flight or on the way, and to ensure that we are keeping people safe, that testing on arrival is really vital. And then again, I can't emphasize enough how important it is for us to waive patent protection so countries can produce a vaccine. Canada has to defend the rights of countries to produce the vaccine, and not, as Justin Trudeau has been doing, defend the rights or the profits of pharmaceutical companies. That is the wrong approach.
Just on the testing measures that were announced yesterday, what do you think of these enhanced testing measures, specifically that there is going to be testing for Canadians returning to the country, except for those coming from the United States?
I think, again, we're seeing a lack of consistency with the approach, without any clear public health advice around why the exception for the United States. I think, like any healthcare policy, there has to be clear, there has to be transparent, it has to be clear, and it's got to be consistent. And it's positive to see a move towards more testing, but what's still problematic is it's not a consistent approach. And that's what we want to see, a consistent approach based on the evidence that keeps Canadians safe from potential transmission coming from other countries. And then finally, and I can't emphasize this enough, we've got to do our part globally to fight this pandemic.
Are you concerned about how these new measures may be rolled out, or what impact this could have on things like the travel industry that have already faced considerable challenges during COVID?
I think that it's clear that there are sectors that have been hard hit by this pandemic, and the travel sector has been one of them. Tourism, of course, has been another. The service sector in general have been hard hit. And part of the reason why we've said pandemic supports should be available, because we know we are not through this pandemic. And the Omicron variant exposes another potential scenario where people might be hard hit, businesses and sectors might be hard hit. And we want to make sure that we're supporting people through this time. So it's just another example of how important it is to keep that help going and make sure it's still available. And in terms of kind of balancing the security of Canadians and the impact on the industry, testing and quarantining are very important. Given the lack of details and the great worry that we have around this variant, I think it's important to take measures now to give us more time to be able to deal with a potential new variant that spreads quickly.
Hi, Mr. Singh. David Thurton, CBC News. Good to see you. Last night or yesterday evening, when the government announced its new travel measures, testing for all international travelers and whatnot, they couldn't say when that would kick into gear, when that would start. Do you have any understanding, or do you give the government any grace? It's a developing situation. Obviously, sometimes these things take time to be put in place, or are you critical of the fact that they're announcing this measure and travelers are still coming into the country, and probably today they won't be tested?
That's a problem around the consistency of the approach. We need testing, and we need it immediately, and that is one of the most important tools in slowing the spread. And so I would say that we needed a clear plan around what the testing is going to be, how it's going to work. And we need to know if there's any basis for the exceptions or the exemptions that they put in place, like why the exemption for certain places and not others. So we need to know this, and it has to be clear, and it has to be consistent. And I would say in general, that is my critique of the Liberal government's approach so far, a lack of consistency and clarity at a time when that's what we need. We need exactly that, consistency and clarity.
I'm just wondering for yourself, do you plan to do any travel internationally or even to the US given this changing situation? Or are you going to be spending the holidays right here?
Well, I can't even entertain the thought of traveling given that I'll be having a little baby in just about a month, at the end of the month. And I'm staying put. If I ever left at this point in time, I'm not sure I'd be able to come back. So I am definitely not going anywhere. And after that, our beautiful baby is born, I'm not leaving anywhere for a while. So that's the
Just
plan.
a clarification, your
Thanks.
team tells me that you are for a boycott of the Olympics. Why don't you say it?